And go to question 10, which is about are feral horses, do they actually have heritage value? What's the evidence about their heritage value? So the Australian Brumby Alliance claimed that feral horses have this heritage value. But there's, to my knowledge, there's only one peer-reviewed study that's looked at genetics of Australia's feral horses, and they looked at Guy Fawkes National Park's horses, and they found that they're not genetically distinct from other horse populations. Of course, Judge O'Brien from the federal court looked at the arguments from both sides and concluded that there's unlikely to be substantial genetic differences. And the Cultural Heritage Report for New South Wales found that feral horse populations around Australia are not genetically distinguishable from domestic horses. And this makes sense because domestic horses regularly interbreed with feral horses. So here's a quote from Brumby runner Ken Connolly on ABC Bush Telegraph. "Any real good Brumby mares that I catch, I'll bring them in and I'll put one of my good coloured stallions with them till it's about 3 years old, give it a shot of hormones and let it go." So there's plenty of domestic horse genes going off into this wild population. Interestingly, I got an email from someone who's in this webinar right now. He said this. He noted that once he was trying to park at Dead Horse Gap, which is that high pass in Kosciuszko, late in 2000, with a Brumby, in quotes, not allowing me to back in properly. It actually allowed 2 German tourists to stroke its back and withers. Clearly not a wild animal at all. So the implication here is that actually people are putting their domestic horses out with the feral horses, presumably because they no longer have to feed them themselves. It's like free feed. So there's some really concerning things going on here that I don't think we've really got a full handle on. The actual heritage horses are looked after, as you would hope they would be, on farms. So, for example, the Australian Stock Horse Association keeps their horses on farms. There's a stud book. And it was these horses that performed at the Sydney Olympics. So while you often hear claims that, it was the Brumbies performing at the Sydney Olympics, no. Actually, no horses taken from the wild performed at the Sydney Olympics. These are carefully trained and looked after horses on farms. And the other heritage horses are the whalers. And again, they keep a stud book for these horses. To be classified as one of these actual heritage horses, you can have no introduced bloodline since 1945. That rules out all the horses out in the national parks. And it was actually these kinds of horses that were bred on farms that went to World War I. So the Cultural Heritage Report says there is no definitive evidence that remount horses were directly taken from the Brumby population of what is now Kosciuszko National Park. And that makes sense because Brumbies were actually derided in those days. They were shot, they were hunted and killed in horrible ways because basically the graziers didn't like Brumbies. They were not well bred, they were not useful for anything. In fact, there's historic newspaper reports where we see people thinking, well, what can we do with these Brumbies? They're only actually good for developing an export meat industry. So if that's the attitude to Brumbies, it's no wonder they didn't contribute to the war effort, and claims to the contrary are just not based on fact. So concluding then, feral horses are not genetically unique. They weren't at the Sydney Olympics and they did not contribute to the war effort. So let's just get our facts straight when we're talking about the so-called heritage value of Brumbies. Okay, I want to come to some suggestion of solutions. Now, we have to acknowledge the local cultural values of feral horses. So clearly a lot of people value these horses. So we need to find a solution that meets that need without compromising the conservation purpose of national parks or the animal welfare of horses and native wildlife. So a key solution was found in South Australia, and this is off-park homes for feral herds. So the Coffin Bay Brumby Preservation Society took all the horses from Coffin Bay National Park when the park staff realised they were causing environmental damage and had to go. This society said, we'll take them. And so they put their money where their mouth was and bought this private property, and now they fund and administer the horse population So take-home messages. Horses cause unacceptable environmental damage. You can only have really low numbers, perhaps one horse every 30 kilometres if we want these really fragile, really slow to recover alpine areas to survive into the future. Aerial culling is cost-effective and it's humane. But you need the whole mix of methods if you want to manage horse populations. So ground shooting, trapping, rehoming, all those things have a role. Horses, if you don't manage horses, and we haven't managed them, horses are going to suffer terrible deaths in the wild, and we've got plenty of evidence of that happening. The main heritage claims about feral horses are contradicted by the evidence, and off-park solutions provide a win-win opportunity.